Welcome to the Group of Five Focus Podcast, where we showcase the power of the Group of Five. I'm your host, Brian Doppel. This off-season, I'm releasing a new series here on the podcast where I get into the details of the most recent and ongoing conference realignment. To do that, I'll be joined by podcasters, journalists, and superfans of the teams that are the subjects of this realignment. They'll help me gain better insight into the players, coaches, and fans of each school and provide an introduction of the programs to their new conferences. This week, we're introducing the UTSA Roadrunners to their new conference, the American Athletic Conference. I'm joined by Jared Kalmus of the Alamodome Audible podcast and Runners Rising, who will walk us through everything we need to know about the UTSA football program as they transition to the American. We'll get into it after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and much more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Let me tell you from personal experience, when I first started this podcast, I knew about Anchor, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the right tool for me. After a little poking around, I found that in fact it was. And when I had some questions when I first started my podcast, Anchor support was there to help. So if this sounds like it might be the tool for you to start your podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, Jared Kalmus, welcome to the Group of Five Focus podcast. Would you like to just take a moment and introduce yourself and talk about some of the work that you do at Alamodome Audible?
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me on. Just found your podcast here recently. I'm looking forward to catching up on a lot of episodes. Listened to a couple. It's great stuff so far. My name's Jared Kalmus. I've been covering UTSA since the first football practice back in, 2009, 2010. I don't know. I've written and talked about UTSA in a lot of places. Right now, most of my coverage is on Alamodome Audible, which is a podcast I run with a couple of my friends. We also have like a blog on our Patreon as well. So we've been doing that for several years now. I also, as of this week, have announced that I'm the Director of Technology for Runners Rising, which is UTSA's new name, image, and likeness collective. And also contribute to Underdog Dynasty as well. Used to be one of the site managers there and Conference USA editor as well. So I've kind of been around the G5's internet sun when it comes to it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for joining and congratulations on that new opportunity with the NIL deal. That's pretty sweet. That's definitely, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So you jumped on at the right time, it seems. That's awesome. I wanted to go ahead and sort of give folks an opportunity to learn a little bit about the UTSA football program, as young as it may be. So let's go ahead and jump in. First, though, with talking about the university as a whole. Can you tell me a little bit about UTSA and what the university is like and what it's known for and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that people, because UTSA is not just new as a football program, it's new as a university as well. So there's not a lot of knowledge, I would say, outside of San Antonio about what UTSA is and what they do and all of that. It's a pretty big school. I mean, they're up to, I think, 35 or 38,000 students now.
Wow.
So it's pretty massive. Most G5 schools are probably half of that, right? You think about athletics and student fees and all that, it makes a big difference. And it gives UTSA a lot of opportunity. But UTSA is a really big research institution. They just got their R1 Carnegie recognition last year. So obviously, like, huge improvements. As much as athletics has improved, academics has improved even more. So it's been a huge stride, since when I got to campus to now. The difference, and it was like a safety school, so to speak. It kind of started out as like a community college kind of deal almost. Just like the place where local 30-year-olds would go get their bachelor's for the first time to get a promotion at work.
Yeah.
So to see it now blossom into this major research institution that's doing all these like amazing research projects and collaborations with public-private partnerships and federal research grants and stuff like that is amazing. I think one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions. I think 60 to 70% of the student body is Hispanic, large chunk of the faculty as well. So that's a huge point of pride for the institution. Of course, being in San Antonio, it's the way that it's got to be, right? You have to serve the community. One of, I think, only 14 Hispanic serving institutions that have the R1 designation. So it's a huge accomplishment for UTSA.
Gotcha. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's
So
awesome. Go ahead, please finish.
I was going to say that's kind of the lay of the land for academics. A lot of focus on engineering, of course. They have a top-ranked cybersecurity program, which I am a product of. I'm very fortunate to say. A lot of international business is a big focus for the school, and of course, they have pretty much everything outside of medical and law UTSA offers. So just a big state school, research heavy, HSI. It's kind of where it's at as a school.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's interesting to get like a big picture of the university as a whole, because I think
Mhm.
I think football programs can kind of take on a lot of that culture and identity of the
Agreed.
school as
Agreed.
a
Yeah.
whole. And so yeah, that's really cool to hear. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And it's cool to hear your connection, your pride in the cybersecurity field. So okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the football program. UTSA football's only been around. I think they played their first season in 2011.
That's correct. Yeah, this will be
So
the 12th season.
okay, cool. So yeah, a short history, but obviously has had some really recent success. And so tell me about the football program. What is it known for? What's the reputation, style of play? What can people expect in the American as UTSA transitions? What kind of play are we looking at?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think the style of play has really changed under this current coaching regime with Jeff Traylor and his staff. Um, let's say the previous staffs, with Coker, it was multiple to a fault where like they never really had an identity on either side of the ball. On defense, they did have a pretty strong 4-2-5 defense that kind of became a staple of the program. But then under Frank Wilson, they were very much trying to run like a bully ball, SEC style that didn't really work for UTSA because they weren't recruiting at a high enough level to support that, or hadn't historically. But now that Jeff Traylor's at UTSA, they're running a system that looks more like what Texas high school programs run. So of course that appeals to recruits because they're going to be running programs that they're used to running from the high school level. And that's kind of to parlay into my point that in the most endearing way possible, UTSA is kind of setting themselves up as a Texas high school football program that happens to play Division I football, right? So it's like number one focus for the program is like support high school coaches, recruit the state of Texas extremely hard. And it's interesting because it's not just at high school level. When you look like the transfer portal guys that go after, and a lot of the JUCOs too, a lot of those guys have Texas highs, whether they went to high
Hmm.
school here or they were coached by a guy that was a former Texas high school football coach. But almost every guy on the roster, especially since Coach Traylor's been here and recruiting those players, is you can kind of draw a line from their connections to Coach Traylor, from like a professional networking perspective when
Yeah.
it comes to Texas high school football. So that's really interesting. And I think like you look at them today, they're a team that plays moderately fast on offense. They keep a good tempo. Frank Harris, the quarterback's a dual threat. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And they like to bomb it down the field. That's been a nice change for UTSA.
Yeah.
They've never really had a stretch on deep kind of offense. UTSA now has 3 receivers that are probably at least borderline NFL talents. So that's been a really joy to watch as a UTSA alumnus. Is an offense that's not afraid to throw downfield. And then on defense, they run out of a 3-3-5 base that looks more like a 4-3, right? The outside linebacker, at least in these first 2 seasons under Traylor, has been much more of a defensive end type of player than a true coverage linebacker. But looking at some of the recruits coming in this year, I think that's going to change, and they're going to run more of a traditional, 3-5 type of defense.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's just going back to what you said about the offense. I'm looking here back at this last season where on offense UTSA scored 516 points. I don't know what that averages out to over the course of 14 games, but holy cow, that's a lot of points. That's incredible.
Mhm.
And that they went 12-2 this year, including the bowl game. I think
Mhm.
that's that's a great season. Those are great numbers. And defense. They say defense wins championships, right? But offense a lot of times puts butts in the seats. And so yeah, it's really cool to see that progression. Yeah, that's awesome. And so tell me about Coach Traylor. Is he an offensive guy? Having not being from Texas, not being familiar with UTSA football, tell me a little about the coach, what he's like, and whether it looks like he's got things going in the right direction. Is that going to
Mhm.
continue, or what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to find anything to criticize Coach Traylor on that doesn't feel like nitpicking at this point. Obviously, the program's seeing unprecedented success.
Yeah,
His background, I think, leans a little bit more heavily on the offensive side of the ball, but he's not kind of like one of those micromanaged coaches that wants to be super involved in the offense and call plays or anything like that. Like he really puts a lot of trust in his coordinators and his assistant coaches, and he has a really strong ethos in developing coaching talent, right? So most of the coaches that have left, either being fired or got another job, they really make a focus to try to pull up guys that are already on the staff and elevate them into other positions. So I think we'll have to see how that works out long term. So far, it's been success. So far, the guys that have been promoted in a trailer have done really well, right? So like it remains to be seen if that's a sustainable thing. If Trailer has found a bit of a market inefficiency here to go a little money ball on you guys. But I think that's a really big focus with Trailer is I think that like he's been at the UTs of the world, he's been in the Arkansas of the world, and he knows like what the infrastructure looks like to have lasting, sustained success at G5 or P5 level. And that's been a really big focus under him is, he always says it's a player's game and, you want to get the best players and let them play. But I think he also knows that when you look at a college football program, there's a lot of things off the field that are really important and really substantial as well. And he's done a great job of working with Dr. Lisa Campos, the athletic director at UTSA, to increase that infrastructure, whether that's facilities, nutrition programs, recruiting assistance, all that stuff. Right? We've seen UTSA make huge improvements in those areas, and I think that will continue definitely in the coming years as UTSA heads into the American.
cool. Is the fan base? I mean, I can only assume with especially last year's season, fan base on board with the coach. Are they? Is
Yeah.
there? Is it a good vibe, a good culture around the program and the fan base right now?
Yeah, definitely. I'm always trying to, temper fan, expectations and excitements a little bit because a 12-2 season doesn't come around often. I mean, I
Yeah,
think Ole Miss just had their first like 10 or 11 win season ever,
that's
and that's
crazy.
a pretty successful program. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of things really broke in UTSA's direction last year. So it'd be interesting to see, if UTSA wins 8-9 games and still competes for a conference championship, will people be let down with that? I mean, obviously, right now people are ready to build a statue for Trailer.
Of course.
Yeah, and, for good reason, of course. But yeah, right now, I mean, it's he can do no wrong in the fan base, and he has certainly earned that status for sure.
Um, yeah, it's always like you said, those kinds of seasons are rare. And
Mhm.
so it's always fun to kind of celebrate when those things happen.
Of
A
course.
lot of fan bases can get spoiled when they have multiple 9, 10 win seasons in a row, and then
Hmm.
they have like an 8 win season and people start losing their minds. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep in mind that, sustained winning in this at this level is hard to come by. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Is would you say that the fan base is excited about the transition to the American? I know things are kind of interesting with the CUSA
Yeah.
right now, particularly with the teams that are leaving for the Sunbelt.
Mhm.
But are UTSA fans ready to go to the American? Do they see this as a step up?
I think so. I think people are really excited to get into a conference with SMU and Tulane, and Memphis as well. Tulane, there was a little bit of history because Tulane was in Conference USA when UTSA first joined it. So there's definitely a lot of excitement in the fan base, but I think a lot of the excitement is more from leaving Conference USA than joining the American because, Conference USA was a mess. The broadcast of the games were pretty unavailable. And even the streaming aspect, it was really difficult to navigate. So I think there's a lot of excitement there. Honestly, like I'm of the opinion that I don't think that fans truly understand how much of a jump up it's going to be, and not just from the football perspective, but also from like the Olympic sport perspective. Like I was watching like a Wichita State, a Memphis game maybe, and it was like on ESPN, middle of the day, massive, beautiful arena, like really good looking players that look like they could have a future in the professional leagues, and I just don't really think UTSA fans understand how massive of a leap it's going to be. I think because so many Conference USA schools are going to the American with UTSA, I think a lot of fans feel like, oh, it's going to be a slight jump. But yeah, I think it's going to have a lot of interesting benefits from a fan quality perspective, but also from a level play perspective that might surprise people.
Yeah, it's hard to for me as an app fan who sort of watched the transition from FCS to the Sun Belt. It was interesting. It didn't really feel. You know, I know we were going up, so to speak, from the FCS
Hmm.
to the Group of Five, but I don't know that fans were really excited about that switch. It felt like a sort of a lateral move. The Sun Belt's changed and things feel different now.
Hmm.
But it is exciting to see how these conferences are changing, how they're adapting, and you know, I think it's easy to sort of shrug off some of these schools who are moving, or these conferences that are like going to look brand new and people don't know what to expect, and it might be easy to shrug it off, but like all these teams that are now great, the Cincinnati's, the Houston's, the UCFs that are going to be transitioning now, but they all came from somewhere, and
Right.
so this is just I see it as a really great opportunity for all of these programs that are moving to really do something great in their new conferences, including the CUSA, which is obviously taking a big hit in the next couple of years.
Hmm.
Um, so let me ask you. I asked you about the fan base being excited about the transition, but as someone who's never been to San Antonio, never been to a UTSA game, can you walk me through what a game day experience is like there? What's the tailgating situation? How excited are the fans to be there? What's the stadium experience like? Give me a walkthrough of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. UTSA has an extremely unique game day experience. I really can't think of another example of a G5 program that has a setup quite like UTSA does. The first being that they play in the Alamodome. It's not too far from campus, 15, 20 minutes, but it's right smack dab in the middle of downtown, right? So visiting fans can come, they can stay on the Riverwalk, they can literally walk to the Alamodome, they can walk back, enjoy a hurricane at Pat O'Brien's and eat some amazing Mexican food and all of that. So it's a great visiting experience. But once you're there in the Alamodome, well, I guess outside the Alamodome, the tailgating scene is unreal. I've been to a lot of football stadiums. I've been to a lot of tailgates, and UTSA is up there with the big boys. I mean, it's amazing. It's a perfect setup for tailgating. It's like two massive lots that are right next to each other. And those
That's
lots
awesome.
yeah, they get really full. The tailgating scene is unreal, especially for a G5 program. I mean, I've been to a lot of P5 games that don't even come close to what UTSA can offer from a tailgating perspective. And I think a lot of that is just like rooted in San Antonio's Hispanic culture of, fiesta, right? Like a lot of folks just love to go out to the tailgates, and like football is like totally secondary for them. They're like, yeah, maybe I'll go inside. It's cool. I'll check it out. But really
Yeah.
like going out there and barbecuing and drinking and all that, like that's the real draw. So the tailgate scene is unreal. Like I really encourage people to make that trip and check it out. I can promise you will not be disappointed. You see all kinds of food out there too. I had a tweet last season that I was walking through the lots and I walked past one tailgate that was playing hip hop music, a lot of younger people, another playing like mariachi music, and then another playing country music. And it's just like the perfect blend of all of San Antonio's different cultures all coming together in one place, to celebrate not only our culture here in San Antonio, but the university and the football program as well. So it's a really beautiful thing. And then once you go inside the stadium, I mean, you're in a facility that just hosted the Final Four not too long ago. I mean, it was built to host an NFL program, which never came and never will come. But the cities continue to invest in it, right? So the amenities are top notch. I mean, I it's really nice. It's a really fortunate position for a G5 program to be in. And I think a lot of folks from the outside are like, oh, UTSA is an off-campus stadium. It's a leased facility, all that stuff. Like once you're there, especially for a big game, like, oh my God, the conference championship was unreal, right? So it really is a really, really nice setup, especially when the program is doing well as they are right now.
Yeah. The conference championship was Western Kentucky this year, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, that looked like an insane atmosphere, but the game that got my attention was the UAB game.
Mm-hmm.
That was so crazy. I was
Yep.
like, I had my wife next to me in the living room. We were just watching it together, and it was incredible. That finish was just totally
Mm-hmm.
insane.
Mm-hmm.
And the atmosphere looked incredible. So
Yeah.
yeah, on the outside looking in, it doesn't look like you said, it's like a leased stadium or anything like that. It
Mm-hmm.
looks like a home game, and
Yeah.
it looks like a great experience. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, and I'll say too, with UTSA going to the American, the broadcast quality of the games in Almadome have been really poor, right? Just like the ESPN Plus school produced broadcast and all that. And UTSA has it better than most schools in that regard. But once those games start getting on ESPN2 and ESPNU, where ESPN is producing the games, I think the loudness of the crowd is really going to start coming through, because these self-produced games, like, they don't have microphones in the stands or anything like that. The cameras aren't that great. So it's been a while since UTSA has hosted a Power Five opponent in the Alamodome, but they used to do that pretty frequently back in the day. And, like, man, you watch those games, is like, who is this little UTSA school? Like, it's loud in there.
That's
And it's
awesome.
just, the acoustics of the dome, it just funnels all the noise down onto the field, and it gets incredibly loud. So it's a really raucous atmosphere.
That's really cool. That's like part of what I love so much about these G5 schools is these fan bases that people might think of as small,
Mhm.
but man, their passion more than makes up for it. And
Mhm.
it doesn't matter how many people are in that stadium. I mean, it matters to a certain extent, but like, you're gonna hear it if people are behind the program and love their school or love their players or whatever. Like, they're
Mhm.
gonna be there and they're gonna show out. Yeah, that's so cool. That sounds awesome. You're making me want to make a trip down to San
Let's do
Antonio.
it. Let's go.
Uh,
We'll get you some brisket. We'll get you some tamales. Like, let's go. I'm ready.
that sounds awesome. I'm extra tempted. You start talking about food, that'll get me down there fast. Um, awesome. So let's talk about when we're in the stadium watching the game. We sort of talked a little bit about the transfer portal and recruiting high school students from the state of Texas. But are there any players that are either veteran players that are going to be around for one more year, or any up and coming players that you think will play an important role in these next couple seasons as UTSA transitions to the American?
Yeah. Oh man, it's kind of a tough question to answer, because UTSA's roster is in a really good spot right now. I think a lot of people watched the last season and they're like, oh, they have a bunch of seniors, so they're probably going to drop off. And I mean, there's definitely some big hits for sure, but a lot of those guys can come back for super senior season. We've already seen a lot of guys announce that they're going to go ahead and do that. I mean, the quarterback, Frank Harris, he actually has 2 seasons left to use, which is pretty phenomenal and crazy to think about, that he could be, starting quarterback for UTC in the American. Just thinking
Yeah,
back to when he was recruited, the high school level.
that's wild. He's had a great couple of years too. So
Yeah.
that would be awesome to see that continue. That would be troublesome for for defenses.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I guess receiver JT Clark, he's listed on the roster as Decorian Clark. That's I think is his birth name. I believe that he was only a sophomore last year, so he should have theoretically 3 years left. I think he's for sure an NFL talent. He's got the size, speed, man, his cuts, his athleticism. If you go back and watch the bowl game, I mean, he had 2 catches in that game that are just like, how in the world did he do that? And to think that he was the number 3 option for UTSA last year is pretty insane. Um, on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, they're an older unit, so I think it's a little bit harder to find some of those like long-term guys going to be around for a while. But one guy that I can think of is starting inside linebacker, Jamal Ligon. So he started as a true freshman for UTSA, I guess 2 seasons ago. So he'll get that year, or yeah, so he'll get that year back because it was the COVID year, and then he has a redshirt year that he didn't use. So he could be around for a while. And he's kind of an interesting story, because I think that he played like tight end and defensive end at the high school level, and then stepped in first day starting inside linebacker.
Wow,
So he's
that's crazy. Athletes are
yeah,
athletes, man, but that's
yeah,
crazy.
seriously. I mean, yeah, and he's like their prototypical Jeff Traylor recruit. Just grabbed him out of East Texas, lightly recruited, but he's just a football player. And people that are tuned into recruiting and the state of Texas always say those East Texas kids are built different. Like, they just have a different drive, different mentality. A lot of those guys are multi-sport athletes that grew up playing both sides of the football. So you can put them anywhere on the field and they're going to go out and make plays. And Jamal Ligon has been exactly that type of player for UTSA.
Yeah, I see that he totaled 64 tackles on the season this year, and that was the second most on the team.
Mhm.
That's a big number. 64 tackles. I mean, that's someone who you've always got to be thinking about as an offensive line, or scheming up for that. That's crazy. That's impressive.
Yeah, and he has so much room to improve too, is the crazy part. He's still learning how to play the linebacker position. Like, if he can really learn how to get off of his blocks and play a little bit tougher inside the tackle box against the run, man, he can be a real stud for sure, especially even moving up to the American Conference. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye out for those guys. And it's just something that's cool. I know that people have some complaints about the transfer portal, but yeah, I'm pro transfer portal because I just think it gives kids an opportunity, these athletes an opportunity to showcase their skills in a new place or in a new way. So yeah, I know it's not going to work out for everybody, but I think that we're still learning about this, and
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how these transfers, these JUCOs, especially JUCO transfers, are gonna play out as they join their new team. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm just going through their stats from last year, especially on oh, what was I just looking at? The rushing stats. There's like 15 different names of rushers that
Yeah.
that totaled
Well,
some yards.
UTSA was in a lot of blowouts last year, so a lot of the guys that
Yeah.
got some carries probably won't be seeing many carries going forward.
Yeah, that's just wild.
Yeah, the
Um,
running back position is actually one of the question marks for UTSA on offense this year, as they lost both of Sincere McCormick left early into the NFL draft, and then
right.
Bernie Brady has a super senior season left to use if he chooses to do so. I've heard rumors both ways. I don't think he knows right now, but if he ends up not coming back, UTSA won't have. They likely won't have a returning player starting at maybe starting or backing up at running back. So
Hmm.
that's definitely one thing to watch out for.
Yeah, okay, good to know. Thanks. Um, so we talked about some players and the game day experience. Let's fast forward. Let's use a crystal ball and look ahead to maybe like 2 or 3 years down the line. UTSA's in the American. They're cemented there. People know them as an American conference team. What do you see? How do you see UTSA fitting there? Do you think that they're going to fit in and jump up to the top of their actually I don't know if they're planning on do divisions or not, but you think they're going to jump up
Mhm.
to the top of the American, or do you think it's going to take some time to do some work and figure things out in their new conference before they really start to succeed?
Yeah, it's really tough to predict, right? I think like this team right now going into the new version of the American will probably be pretty competitive, right? But then you look at like how many of the major players on this team are juniors and seniors. Most of those guys probably won't be there, right? When UTSA moves into the American, we still don't even know what year that's going to be, right? So that's really the hard part.
Right.
But for me, I always look, big picture, like what's the off-field situation look like? Like what do the recruiting classes look like? Obviously, what is the size of the assistant coaching staff look like? The off-field personnel. What does their investment look like in coaching salaries? What's the facilities look like? All that kind of stuff. I think UTSA is already on par with all the teams that are going to be left in the American. I don't think you could say that for the Houston's, UCF, Cincinnati, right? But those schools won't be there anymore. I think like they're going to fit in pretty nicely. I think they'll be in the upper half when it comes to a lot of that off field, like I was talking about earlier, like infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think UTSA is like already investing as if like they are in the American. And that's not to say that they're exceptionally or even beyond any of the other teams that are there, but they're acting like they're moving up to a bigger league, like they're increasing their investment. So that's massive. And I think like the recruiting class at UTSA is wrapping up, post signing day. They still have a couple spots left to use. I think it would rank like fifth in the American or something like that, which is pretty respectable.
Yeah.
Of course, you need to have multiple classes like that in a row to really
Hmm.
feel comfortable, competing for a championship in that league. But they're heading in the right direction, and they've locked Trailer up to a 10-year extension, which still feels crazy to say in college
That's
football.
wild.
I know,
So
seriously,
much can
it's
change. So much can change from
I
year to
know,
year. That's
I
so
know,
crazy.
I know, seriously. But I feel good that they're not going to be a laughing stock stepping in on day one. But it's also tough to predict them to step in and really be the top dog, right? Because I think there's a lot of players in the roster that weren't recruited to compete at that level, right? So I think there's some roster turnover that has to happen and all that. But to wrap it all up, I think they're in a pretty good position, and they'll probably feel as strongly as they possibly could. And then hopefully they just continue to recruit at the level they had over the past year. So
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of programs experience that where the players that were recruited for a different level of play,
mhm,
and so, yeah, I think that makes perfect sense that there does need to be a little bit of turnover there. But
mhm,
the way that this realignment has gone, it seems like it's giving programs a bit of a leg up, a little bit of an opportunity to sort of pre-recruit for the transition. And
right.
so perhaps with UTSA and some of the their compatriots that are moving to the American. Maybe it won't be as much of a transition. So that's
Mhm.
just maybe a
Mhm.
thought.
Yeah,
um,
it would be a different story if they were moving in and Houston and Cincinnati and UCF were still there, but losing those
yeah.
top three programs kind of lessens the blow a little bit for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Those three in particular are just, yeah, so strong. It's
Mhm.
as frankly, I'm gonna miss watching them and like covering them
Mhm.
and paying so much attention to them. But because yeah, like good for them, go get your money.
Right, of
Uh,
course.
but yeah, man,
I know
that's
it feels weird as a G5 guy. I feel so much affinity to those programs, and then now
yeah.
it's like, they're just another big school now.
Yeah.
Screw those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking at the new look American Athletic Conference, and there's a couple of teams on here that jump out to me as potential rivals
Mhm.
for the Roadrunners. But I'm curious, are there any games that could likely be on UTSA's schedule come 2023 or whenever, that you think a lot of the fan base is going to have circled as the game to go to? Do you think you see any potential new or upcoming rivalries in the American Athletic Conference?
Yeah, well, I mean, SMU is the obvious one, right? The whole Dallas San Antonio thing, right? UNT claiming Dallas is a bit of a stretch if you've ever been in the Metroplex. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially if UNT continues to slide as they've been, right? And SMU stays strong and
Yep.
UTSA stays strong. I think that's going to be, a lot of big time battles for potential division titles there. Also, huge, massive socioeconomic differences between your average SMU student and alumnus versus a UTSA one. So that will be
Mm,
very interesting to monitor.
I can imagine.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a good culture, a good clash of cultures between fan bases. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, exactly. So that should be hopefully fun. I think Memphis has potential too, right? Because UTSA went into Memphis and ended their like 2 or 3 year streak without losing a home game, right? And a massive comeback win too. So I mean, I think that really put UTSA on some Memphis fans' radar. I was at that game and I had a lot of Memphis fans come up to me afterwards and were like, "Oh man, like you guys were awesome. We hope we can come visit San Antonio sometime." And I
Cool.
think that might end up like one of those. I think like UTSA and UAB kind of have a rivalry of respect going on, where like both programs kind of tip the hat to the other one. So
Yeah,
I could kind of see
that's
Memphis
awesome.
and UTSA growing that kind of rivalry. But yeah, we'll see. UTSA doesn't have a ton of history with a lot of the schools in the conference. Um, they've played Tulsa once in that 2013 season when Conference USA was transitioning, I guess from version 2.0 to 3.0, whatever you want to call it. So I think it remains to be seen. I think SMU is the obvious one. We'll see if that pans out. But I mean, I think it's great. Like you can never really predict what's going to happen, right? These conferences have weird rivalries pop up all the time. So,
Yeah.
hopefully UTSA finds their fit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There's kind of a lot to choose from here, but yeah, SMU would be great. Keeping it in state, like you said, the difference of cultures between the two schools. I think that provides a good
Mhm.
environment for a rivalry to sort of
Absolutely.
percolate a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes rivalries come out of nowhere, and yeah, if you had told me when App transitioned to the Sun Belt that like App fans would get rowdy about playing Georgia State, like
Yep.
that's like so
Yep.
confusing to me.
Yep.
But yeah, now Georgia State has Sean Elliott there, an App guy, and so yeah, there's
Mhm.
just like lots of
Oh
lots of
yeah, I forgot about
mingling. Yeah,
that. Yeah.
lots of
Yeah,
mingling between the coaching trees now.
Louisiana Tech was that school for UTSA when they first joined. They actually joined the WAC together. No one really thought that those schools would really care about each other all that much. But that first game they played, there was some pretty like nasty like after the whistle activity going on, and it just kind of spewed like this like really. It was like the players hit each other even more than the fans did. So those games were fun.
Mm,
UTSA got whipped up in most of them. Don't get me wrong,
yeah,
but it was still like really chippy, fun games that felt like they mattered, right? So like we
yeah,
definitely need more of that for sure.
absolutely. Um, is there anything when you think of like the transition? You've mentioned a lot of the behind the scenes development that's going on from UTSA's side. Is there anything you feel like is missing in the transition? Like, is there anything that you think UTSA really needs to develop or to grow in a particular area in order to successfully make this transition?
Not non-football, there's a lot of work to be done. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
From the football perspective, I think they need some more bodies on the recruiting staff. Like if you go on like Memphis and SMU's website and you look at like recruiting assistant titles and, director of high school relations and all that stuff. UTSA doesn't really have many of those positions, right? It's
Okay.
really just two guys that handle all the recruiting and then the coaching staff. So I think that's one area that UTSA needs to make a massive investment in, is more of those off-field people. I went to a U of H game. Actually live like right across the street from their campus, and I went to one of their games. Actually, that game against SMU that had that crazy finish with a kickoff return for a
Yeah.
touchdown.
Wild.
And I was sitting in the section where the recruits sit, and I was just amazed at like how many people there were running around talking to recruits, making sure they were okay. Like all like official like U of H staffers. I'm like, man, like I do not think that happens at UTSA games. I think you get your
Wow.
ticket and you kind of walk in. So I think like those that's one area that UTSA will need to grow into for sure. And then, like I said earlier, I think like that lower level of the roster, like the guys that aren't anticipated to be starters, those depth players, I think
Mm.
that's where UTSA needs to make some big improvements, is like moving away from like that low 3-star guy to like where every player on the roster is like a mid 3-star, because that's how a lot of these rosters are in the American, right? It's guys that are faster, stronger, more athletic coming out of high school, and then they get into these programs where there's better development, more competition, and they continue to get better, right? So I think from the on-field perspective, that's the big thing for UTSA, is developing that depth lower in the roster. Like the starters, I think, can go head to head with most of the schools in the American, but I'm more worried about like that third string and some of those second string guys and how they're going to hold up.
Yeah, absolutely. That depth is so key. You
Mm-hmm.
see it all the time with transitioning schools. Like, like you said, the first string and maybe some of the second stringers can go head to head, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't want your team in a place where if one player goes down, that whole side of the ball is like completely
Yep.
done.
Yep.
You want someone to be able to step up into that position that's just as ready, just as
Mm-hmm.
prepared to play the same level of competition.
Yeah, and that goes across all levels. Like, think of how many potential G5 or P5 upsets we see every season, where at halftime it's tied or it's within one score, and then in the fourth quarter they just get blown out like a
Yeah,
21-0 run. It's all
yeah,
about
they're
depth,
wiped.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Yep, totally. Um, so I want to ask you sort of if you were introducing the UTSA football program to your new conference, what would you tell them to expect from UTSA in the conference? What is it that the Roadrunners are bringing to the American Athletic Conference?
I think just a really big and engaged fan base, which, it's not that every year UTSA gets huge crowds, but they've consistently been at the top or near the top of Conference USA attendance figures almost every year that they've been in there. They're really the only show in San Antonio when it comes to football. There's no other real competition for major football in the town. So there's a lot of, I hate to use the word bandwagon, because I don't think UTSA has been good enough historically to have bandwagon fans, but a lot of fans that like didn't attend the university, right? So I think you get a little bit of that probably like with Cincinnati and UCF, right? It's people that like just live in Orlando, live in Cincinnati, and just kind of latch onto the. And UTSA gets a lot of that as well, which I think is great personally. I love that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's all. That's about the brand right there. That's cool.
yeah, exactly. And I think, UTSA more than almost any program in America, like kind of embodies Hispanic culture and brings that aspect to it as well. So you get a little bit of uniqueness, kind of like I would say like with Tulane having like the whole like Mardi Gras and, jazz and all that, like they have their own unique city culture, which San Antonio definitely does as well. And I think people will find like as you visit and come to UTSA that the city is really hospitable. It's a tourism city, right? So like it's in our blood to be welcoming and invite people in and give them tacos and all of that. So I definitely hope that people will make that trip out, and I think they'll have a good time for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love that mindset of really, I mean, it sounds like UTSA is really going to be bringing something to the conference as well as far as competition, but also as well
Mhm.
as far as like an environment, a culture of around football too. So that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
I'm excited to see the American with UTSA and all of these other teams kind of moving into it. I know that maybe a lot of fans are sort of bummed about the programs that are leaving, but
Of
I
course.
think it's going to create a really cool opportunity for some of these other schools to make a name for themselves.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
what I would say for UTSA is like, were you that excited about UCF joining the American like when they first came in, right? No, like they were really bad and they didn't have a lot of
great
fans at the
point.
time, right? I think UTSA has that same blueprint. Like they've been fortunate to have some recent success before they joined the American, but I think a lot of that same blueprint that helped UCF skyrocket. And that's not to say UTSA is going to do the same thing, but there's that blueprint that helped UCF skyrocket. Huge enrollment. only show in town, not a lot of competition for football dollars, and an administration that really wants to compete, really wants to win, is not afraid to spend money to do it. UTSA has all those things: young fan base, young alumni base, with growing income, right? I always mention that the average UTSA alumnus is like 40, 38, something like that. At most schools, that's in the 60s and 70s figure.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So as the alumni base grows, obviously the amount of disposable income that can be donated to the program rises as well. So I think there's a lot of things really going in UTSA's favor, and hopefully they can continue to take care of business and make these incremental steps. And I think they're going to fit right in the American. I think folks are really going to enjoy watching UTSA develop with that ESPN exposure and that American conference money for sure.
Awesome. Well, Jared, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and your experience with UTSA football. I wanted to give you the opportunity to share and plug any of your work that you want to share. Where can people find you, and where can they connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm unfortunately active on Twitter, probably more than I should be, at Jared UTSA, if you guys want to follow me there. And then the podcast account is at Alamo Audible. And then if you want to subscribe to our podcast, our YouTube channel and all that, we're Alamodome Audible on pretty much every platform other than Twitter, because Alamodome Audible is too long for the Twitter character limit. So I hope you guys will check us out. And if you're a American Athletic Conference content creator and would like to collaborate with me, please let me know. I'd love to touch base and start to figure out, get to know each other a little bit.
All right, do it, y'all. Check out Jared's work. He does good stuff. So thank you again for coming on, sir. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks again.
That's all for this episode of the Group of Five Focus podcast. Thanks to Jared Kalmus for shedding some light on the UTSA Roadrunners football program. Be sure to follow and support Jared by following the links in the episode description. Also, be sure to check out the other realignment introduction episodes in the feed, including the Marshall, Jacksonville State, and Charlotte episodes. They're mostly fresh and basically evergreen. I'd also love to connect with more listeners, so please reach out on social media at G5FPod to keep the conversations going. And if you haven't already, please follow, rate, and review the pod on your podcast platform of choice. Let me know what you've enjoyed and what you'd like to hear more of. And as always, be sure to share this podcast with anyone you know that might need some more Group of Five content in their lives. Until next time, my friends, my question for you is, what is one thing you can do to showcase the power of the Group of Five?